My sister was born into a legendary line of healers. Since she was a child, she was bathed in rare herbs and smoked with ancient incense. Her very body carried a natural, medicinal fragrance. When she turned 17, she was summoned to the royal pack. Her mission was to preserve the beauty of the future Luna, the crown princess. Rumor had it that drinking the heart's blood of a woman with a fragrant body could grant eternal youth. It was a dark, forbidden myth. 1 month later, the crown prince sent her back. But she wasn't the sister I knew. He had tossed her desiccated, bloodless corpse back to us like trash. I held her cold body, consumed by a grief so sharp it felt like a physical wound. 5 years later, a lowly maid presented a miracle cure to the crown princess. It was a medicine that produced a haunting, heavenly scent when consumed. It was called Goddess's Glow. A strange thing happened in the royal estate this morning. Overnight, the crown princess's face had broken out in a horrific red rash. It was itchy, painful, and ugly. You useless quacks. What does the pack pay you for if you can't even cure a simple rash? Seraphina, the crown princess, was livid. She screamed at the pack doctors, her face twisted in rage. The doctors kept their heads bowed, terrified to speak. The maids and guards trembled in the corners. Everyone knew Seraphina's vanity was her greatest pride. Even a single pimple would usually result in a doctor being lashed. If they cured her, they might get a small reward. If they failed, they were often dragged out and beaten to death. She called it cleansing the incompetent. But the ones who suffered most were the young maids. Right now they were kneeling with their heads down, hearts racing. They were terrified that if her mood didn't improve, she would order their faces to be scarred out of spite. But that wasn't the worst part. There were rumors that she used the blood of young girls to nourish her blood lotus. It was a rare plant said to have de-aging properties. Seraphina was desperate to stay young, and the time for her natural beauty to fade was approaching. Suddenly, her sharp voice sliced through the silence with a new order. Unfortunately, I was among the group of girls kneeling on the cold floor. Chaos erupted as guards moved to grab us. Just as I was about to be hauled away, a voice rang out through the hall. Your Highness, I know someone who can cure you. Everyone's eyes turned toward the source. It was Kelsey. 2 days ago, Kelsey had fallen and badly bruised her face. I had given her a secret ointment, and she had healed instantly. She was the first friend I'd made since entering the estate. Or so I thought. We knew everything about each other's supposed backgrounds. I also knew she was impulsive and didn't always think things through. That was how my knowledge of herbal medicine reached Seraphina's ears. From that day on, I became her personal apothecary, a master of her beauty routines. I presented her with a spiritual elixir. Combined with specialized herb baths, it made her entire body exude a captivating fragrance. I called it Goddess's Glow. Since then, Alaric, the crown prince, had become obsessed with her. He couldn't keep his hands off his wife. I was no longer forced to do backbreaking labor like hauling waste or scrubbing floors. All those dirty jobs were handed over to Kelsey. Kelsey, who had always been ambitious, grew bitter and jealous. Before long, at Seraphina's birthday gala, Kelsey took a risk. She presented a box of scented powder she had made herself. I knew she had stolen the formula from me. I had taught her a few basics before, and she thought she could replicate my work. Seraphina was intrigued. After using it, her complexion looked even more radiant. She looked at Kelsey with rare approval. Where did you learn this? I like it very much. Kelsey beamed with pride. It's an heirloom formula from my family, Your Highness. I'm glad it pleases you. Just like that, Kelsey was promoted to stay by Seraphina's side. But luck wasn't on her side. A few days later, Seraphina's skin began to rot. She went into a demonic rage, destroying everything in her chambers. I rushed to pick up the little princess, Seraphina's daughter, who had been pushed to the ground. Go back to your room, little one, I whispered. Your mother will see you once she feels better. The little girl was led away sobbing. I knelt before Seraphina. After getting her permission, I carefully applied a cooling salve to her burning skin. Her expression softened almost instantly. Your Highness has such delicate skin, I murmured while working. It's best to stick to what we know works. That powder seemed effective, but it caused a violent backlash. Seraphina barely heard me. Her eyes were fixed on Kelsey, who was kneeling outside the door. Kelsey was kneeling on broken porcelain shards. Her knees were a bloody mess as she begged for mercy. Please, Your Highness. It was Vesper. She's the one who taught me. She must have used me to sabotage you. Seraphina picked up a heavy tea set and hurled it at Kelsey's forehead. You filthy dog, she hissed. You think I'm a fool? First you claim it's a family secret, then you blame her? Your mouth is full of lies. Guards, rip her tongue out and break her legs. She can be fertilizer for my garden. The screaming faded as Kelsey was dragged away. I lowered my eyes and stepped back respectfully. Please calm yourself, Your Highness. I noticed a scar on your wrist earlier. In a few days, I can prepare an ointment to make it vanish completely. Seraphina looked skeptical, though her anger had cooled. Are you certain you can do that? I nodded solemnly. She let out a cold laugh. That scar is 5 years old. I've used every expensive cream in the world, and nothing worked. I hate people who make empty promises to win my favor. She saw a flicker of nervousness on my face and smiled cruelly. Since you've spoken, I'll give you the chance. But if you fail, you'll be the next one to disappear from this world. I kept my head down, accepting the challenge. I stared at the scar for a long time. I knew exactly where it came from. It was the mark left when my sister fought back while Serafina was draining her blood 5 years ago. I was an orphan. Human traffickers had sold me to a farming family to be a child bride. But those people were monsters. They were willing to sell my young self to an old widower for a single silver coin. I escaped. When my sister found me, I was starving, eating the raw meat of a dead rabbit in the woods. My sister, Lyra, was a genius healer. Her body naturally smelled like sweet herbs. She was the pride of our clan. She took me in, a girl with no home. For the first time, I had a family. But life wasn't easy. Our uncles were cruel to her, and the other disciples hated me. I was at that age where I caused trouble everywhere. Lyra took many lashes on my behalf. I loved making poisons and cultivating toxic plants. I loved the feeling of freedom that came with it. But the old, rigid elders refused to let me leave the mountain. They banned me from alchemy and told me to submit. They called me a disgrace to the clan and a plague to the world. They said I was born evil. But the people I wanted to poison were the bad ones. The corrupt officials who preyed on the poor, the bandits who burned villages, and the parents who sold their children for a handful of grain. Was I really wrong? I didn't think so. So why did they treat me like a monster? Only Lyra believed in me. Once, she risked her life to carry me back from the freezing snow. When I woke up, I saw her back covered in whip marks. She was in so much pain her eyebrows were pinched together. Yet she still smiled and asked if I was cold or hungry. Lyra would bathe me in medicinal waters and apply ointments to my skin. I would cry, my heart aching for her. She would just smile. Don't cry, Vesper. It doesn't hurt. Later, I learned to be quiet. I learned to be obedient. I even learned to smell like her, carrying that same sweet, medicinal scent. But then, she left me forever. Back then, the rumor spread that the heart's blood of a fragrant woman could preserve youth. The clan elders forced her to the capital to treat the crown princess. Serafina was known as the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. She valued her face above all else. Hearing that Lyra was an expert in beauty, she faked an illness to lure her into the estate. When Lyra was finally thrown back to me, her skin was shriveled and white. Her body was riddled with holes, looking like dried straw. She smelled of decay. The clan members were too disgusted to touch her. They dumped her body in a mass grave. Not a single person cried for her. Only I held her shriveled corpse, screaming until my voice gave out. That night, after I buried her, I poisoned everyone in the clan. Because every single one of them was an accomplice. I wanted everyone who had a hand in her death to rot in hell. I kept my sister's essence in a special vessel, turning her into a living vessel. Slowly, her features began to look like a living person again. Her cheeks turned rosy. But I would never hear her call my name again. She named me Vesper, a name meant to represent a peaceful evening. I chose the name Toomey, representing the dead end of a road. The elders were right about one thing. I was born bad. A monster with nowhere to go. Serafina was deeply favored by Alaric, but she was also incredibly insecure. There was a 5-year age gap between them. She was older, and she felt the pressure of time every single day. She knew beauty was the only thing keeping his love alive. She was terrified of aging. She dressed in the finest silks every day and refused to let anyone see her without her mask of perfection. Anyone who saw her look unseemly had their eyes gouged out. She forbade Alaric from taking concubines or seeing other women. But a woman's status in the pack depended on her children. To secure her position, she needed a son. Yet her first child was a daughter, a Macy. During dinner one night, I was busy setting the table. Suddenly, the sound of chopsticks slamming against the wood echoed through the room. Macy, did I not teach you to eat by yourself? Why are you letting your father feed you? Serafina's face was dark. Alaric, who was busy peeling shrimp for his daughter, stopped and looked at his wife. Serafina, why are you getting angry at a child? It's just a shrimp. Alaric placed the shrimp in Macy's bowl. Macy started to eat, her little eyes wide with fear. Serafina's expression turned cold. She reached out and swiped the bowl off the table. It shattered on the floor. I told you to do it yourself. Why don't you listen to your mother? The bowl took a pot of hot soup down with it. The scalding liquid splashed all over Macy's arm. The little girl immediately burst into tears of pain. Alaric rushed to check on his daughter. The child's skin was red and blistering. Serafina, what is wrong with you? Macy is just a little girl. Why are you so harsh? Alaric looked genuinely heartbroken. Your daughter is burned and instead of caring, you're just screaming. I'm truly disappointed in you. With that, Alaric picked Macy up and stormed out to find a doctor. Serafina sat there in shock for a long moment. Then, She let out a primal scream and flipped the entire table over. That little brat. She's just like her father, always making me look bad. Suddenly, she turned and slapped me hard across the face. Why didn't you stop me? Are you blind? I kept my head down and said nothing. When she was this angry, silence was the only way to avoid more violence. But her anger didn't come from guilt over hurting her child. She was angry because her daughter was stealing Alaric's attention. What a monstrous mother. She didn't even notice that when she pushed the bowl, the porcelain had sliced the girl's wrist. Alaric didn't visit Serafina for several days. Once she calmed down, she picked out some gifts to apologize to Macy. Macy was happy to see me, but she shrunk away from her mother. Serafina didn't have the patience to stay long. She muttered a few words and left. That night, she prepared Alaric's favorite snacks to apologize to him. Alaric wasn't truly the type to stay mad at her forever. No one wanted to believe a mother didn't love her own child. But I knew the truth. Serafina only loved herself. Macy's birthday was approaching. Alaric adored his daughter. He had a rare pearl brought in from the southern coast just for her. The pearl was fashioned into a beautiful hair pin. Alaric pinned it into his daughter's hair himself. Truly my daughter. You're far more precious than the other noble girls. You look exactly like your mother. Those words didn't sit well with Serafina. She couldn't stand the thought of anyone, even her own daughter, being more beautiful or more loved than her. A few days later, Macy accidentally had hot candle wax splashed on her face while playing. A red, ugly scar formed on her soft cheek. Serafina rushed to her side immediately. Following her orders, I prescribed a medicine for Macy. The medicine healed the wound, but it ensured the scar would never fade. Serafina was finally at peace. No one would threaten her position as the most beautiful woman in the pack now. But a few days later, a stunning new girl was brought into the estate as a potential concubine. Serafina caused a massive scene and had the girl thrown out in front of Alaric. That night, Alaric comforted her. She leaned into his chest, her medicinal scent seemingly stronger than usual. She cried beautifully. Alaric, will you really stay with me forever? Alaric looked at the vulnerable woman in his arms and felt his heart melt. He could never forget how she had stayed by his side when he was just a struggling heir. He remembered how her family had helped him secure his position. Back then he was the underdog. The previous Luna had tried to kill his mother. It was Serafina who had convinced the elders to support him. It was her father, Commander Sterling, who had investigated the corruption and saved Alaric from exile. How could he forget all that? He stroked her hair and spoke softly. Don't worry, Serafina. I will treat you well for the rest of my life. You are the only one for me. They shared a night of deep conversation, and their bond seemed stronger than ever. Serafina was overjoyed. But her smile vanished when she returned from a visit to the Queen Mother's palace. I knew the new girl had been sent by the Queen Mother herself. I also knew the Queen Mother was putting immense pressure on Serafina. It had been years, and Serafina still hadn't produced a male heir. The elders were getting impatient. I massaged Serafina's shoulders while she ranted about the Queen Mother. That old hag. If it weren't for me and my father, she'd still be rotting in the cold palace. All she talks about is a grandson. Does she think I don't want one? Serafina's voice grew more agitated. Suddenly, a ball rolled into the room. Serafina looked up and saw Macy coming in to retrieve it. She stood up instantly and began screaming at the girl. It wasn't discipline, it was just pure unfiltered rage. Macy's crying only annoyed Serafina more. She grabbed a whip used for punishing servants and raised it. I rushed forward and shielded Macy with my back. The whip cracked against me. Seeing me interfere only made her angrier, and she struck harder, drawing blood. Macy was hurried away by other maids. I didn't cry or scream. I waited until Serafina was finished before standing up. After changing my blood-stained clothes, I returned to serve her. She took the tea I offered with trembling hands, acting as if nothing had happened. Vesper, she said quietly, I know your medical skills are superior. I want you to make me a fertility potion, the most powerful one you have. And it must ensure I give birth to a boy. I agreed immediately. When I delivered the medicine, I told her clearly that there were 2 types of potions. They had to be rotated to minimize the damage to her body. Serafina frowned as she listened to my nagging, then downed the medicine in one gulp. Afterward, she whispered to herself, this scent, it feels so familiar. It was exactly like the fragrance that now seeped from her own skin. That night, news came that Macy had a high fever. Alaric and Serafina rushed over. Thankfully, the doctor said she would be fine. In front of Alaric, Serafina played the role of the perfect, worried mother. Alaric sighed with relief. Serafina, you and our daughter are the greatest blessings the heavens gave me. Serafina smiled but said nothing. She told me to stay and look after Macy. Once they left, Macy ordered all the other servants to leave, keeping only me. The feverish look vanished from her face. She looked at me with a calm, cold clarity that no 7-year-old should possess. Days turned into weeks. The Queen Mother was still demanding a grandson, and Serafina's belly remained flat. She would beat and scream at me whenever her frustration boiled over. When I couldn't provide a better formula fast enough, she ignored my warnings and started taking the high-dosage potion every day. A month passed, and she saw no negative side effects, so she relaxed. I continued to balance her health while brewing her medicine daily. Soon, the news broke: Serafina was pregnant. Alaric and the Queen Mother were ecstatic. The king sent countless treasures. The entire estate was filled with joy. Only I slipped away. I carried a basket of ritual paper money hidden under a cloth and went to a deserted, ruined wing of the palace. It was eerie and cold, especially at night. I walked to the overgrown backyard without hesitation. I set the paper money on fire. The flames illuminated a wooden tablet with no name on it. My eyes welled with tears. Today was the anniversary of Lyra's death. Footsteps sounded behind me. I went on high alert instantly. Who's there? It's me. Macy stepped out from the shadows. The crown princess is celebrating her heart out today. Why aren't you there, Macy? Why come here? She's happy, so I am miserable, the little girl said, looking at me. Vesper, aren't we both people who want her dead? I narrowed my eyes, studying her. Macy was only 7, but her gaze was sharp and cynical. It was the most bizarre thing I'd encountered in this palace. If she hadn't revealed herself to me, I might have been fooled forever. She smiled thinly. It doesn't matter who I am. All you need to know is that she is our common enemy. And I will be your most useful ally on this path of revenge. Serafina's mood was excellent for several days. With the right care, her face grew even more radiant and pale. Her beauty was undeniable, but it didn't change her sadistic nature. I heard the blood lotus was almost in full bloom. Everything was going according to my plan. Alaric spent more time with her than ever. He often brought Macy along to visit. They looked like a perfect, happy family. But I noticed that every time Serafina smiled, there was a flash of pure disgust in her eyes. Soon a rumor spread. Macy and Serafina had a fight, and Macy had been pushed into the pond. Every servant present saw it. It was Serafina herself who had pushed her daughter into the freezing water. The water of the royal pond was not merely cold. It was stagnant, choked with the rotting roots of summer lilies and the black silt of the palace drainage. When Alaric dragged Macy out of the dark water, her small lips were already a bruising shade of blue, her wet hair plastering against her cheeks like thin, dead veins. She didn't scream. She didn't even cry. She simply shivered, her tiny fingers clutching Alaric's wet velvet cloak with a quiet, terrified desperation. Serafina. Alaric's voice was not a roar, but a low, dangerous growl that rattled the window panes of the nearby pavilion. He stood by the edge of the stone embankment, his breathing shallow, his chest rising and falling as he glared at his wife. Explain this. Now. Serafina stood 10 feet away, her silk skirts gathered in her hands to keep them from the mud. Her face was pale under her heavy makeup, her eyes darting from Macy to the group of trembling maids who had witnessed the fall. For a fraction of a second, a look of genuine panic crossed her features, but she quickly smoothed it over, her voice rising in a thin, defensive pitch. Alaric, she slipped. Serafina cried, taking a step toward him, her hand reaching out. I was only trying to grab her. The stones are wet from the morning dew. Why are you looking at me like I'm a monster? Alaric didn't look at her. He looked down at his daughter. Macy, Alaric said softly, his rough hand wiping the black mud from her cheek. Tell me what happened. Macy looked at her mother. Serafina's eyes were wide, her pupils contracting into tiny, black pinpricks as she stared at her daughter. It was a look of pure, silent threat, the same look she used before she had a servant's tongue ripped out. Macy shuddered, burying her face in Alaric's neck. I wanted to see the fish, Macy whispered, her voice cracking with the cold. Mother told me to get closer. Then she said I was in her way. I don't remember the rest, Father. I'm sorry. I don't remember the rest. It was a perfect, devastating answer. It was exactly what a terrified 7-year-old would say under the weight of maternal abuse, and Alaric knew it. His slate-gray eyes turned completely cold as he looked back at Serafina. I am taking Macy to the healer's wing, Alaric said, his voice dropping to a register so low it felt like a physical threat. Do not follow us, Serafina. If I see your face in my daughter's chambers tonight, I will have the guard bar your doors. He turned his back on her, carrying the shivering girl toward the stone steps. Serafina stood in the mud, her hands clenching into fists so hard her long, gold-plated nails dug into her palms, drawing tiny drops of dark, thick blood. She looked at the maids, her face twisting into a demonic, pale rage. You, she hissed, pointing a shaking finger at me. Vummy, get to my chambers. Bring the tea. If it isn't ready when I arrive, I'll have you whipped until your bones show. I kept my head down, my gaze fixed on the muddy grass where Macy's small slippers had left a trail. Yes, Your Highness, I murmured. The master bedroom of the crown princess was suffocatingly warm, the heavy velvet drapes closed to shut out the pale autumn sun. Serafina sat in front of her massive, gold-framed mirror, her fingers clawing at the skin of her neck. The pregnancy had progressed to its 6th month, but her body was not carrying the healthy, natural glow of a future Luna. Her skin had turned a strange, translucent shade of white, almost like wet parchment, and beneath the surface, the faint, blue lines of her veins looked dark and swollen, like tiny, writhing worms. "It's the baby," she muttered, her eyes wild as she stared at her reflection. "The boy, he's taking my strength, Vesper. My skin. Why is it so dry? Why does it itch?" I stood behind her, my fingers gently massaging her shoulders. My hands carried the faint, sweet scent of Lyra's dried herbs, the same fragrance that now seeped from Serafina's own skin like a ghostly perfume. "The prince is a powerful alpha, your highness," I said softly, my voice a soothing, hypnotic purr in the dim room. "A male heir of the royal pack requires immense spiritual energy to form. Your body is simply sacrificing its temporary beauty to build his bones. It is a noble sacrifice." "I don't want to sacrifice my beauty," she shrieked, her hand slamming against the marble dressing table, knocking over a bottle of expensive perfume. "Alaric. He hasn't looked at me in a week. He spends every evening in Macy's room. If I lose my face, Vesper, I lose everything." She grabbed my sleeve, her manicured nails cutting through the fabric into my arm. "The potion. Give me the high-dosage one again. The one that made my skin pale and tight last month." "Your highness," I said, putting on my best look of professional concern, my voice dropping to a whisper. "The high-dosage potion is highly concentrated. If you take it daily, the strain on your womb will be immense." "The child." "I don't care about the strain," she roared, her face contorting into a mask of pure, selfish desperation. "The child is safe inside me. Just brew the medicine. If I see another blue vein on my neck tomorrow, I will have your fingers cut off, one by one." I lowered my eyes, my lashes casting long, quiet shadows over my cheeks. "As you wish, your highness," I said. I went to the alchemical cabinet in the corner of her suite. The room was filled with the heavy, sweet scent of the blood lotus she had been consuming daily. The plant sat in a large, silver pot near the window, its dark red petals fully open, looking like a cluster of fresh, wet blood clots. They believed the blood lotus was a miracle of youth. They didn't know that for 5 years, I had been cultivating the parent plant in the graveyard where my sister was dumped. I had fed its roots with the ashes of the poisoned elders and the soil that had swallowed Lyra's decaying flesh. The blood lotus wasn't a source of life. It was a parasite. It took the internal heat of the person who consumed it, turning their organs into dry, brittle straw while keeping the external skin pale and tight like a preserved corpse. I pulled out a small, blue ceramic jar. Inside was the fertility potion, a mixture of high-concentration mistletoe, nightshade, and hormonal stimulants that caused a rapid, false swelling of the uterus. There was no male heir inside her. There was nothing but a mass of fluid and calcified, rotting tissue, a phantom pregnancy that would continue to grow until it tore her open from the inside out. I poured the dark, bitter liquid into a golden cup, added a drop of the blood lotus essence, and carried it back to her. Serafina snatched the cup, her throat working in a series of greedy, desperate swallows as she downed the medicine. She let out a long, shuddering sigh, her skin immediately tightening, the blue veins on her neck fading back into the ghostly, paper-white surface. "Yes," she whispered, her eyes closing in relief. "That's it. That is the scent." She looked at her reflection, a smug, triumphant smile touching her lips. "Alaric will see," she muttered. "He will see who the true Luna is." That night, the palace was dead silent, the cold winter fog rolling through the stone corridors like a silent, gray tide. I walked down the dark hallway of the West Wing, carrying a small basket of fresh laundry. As I passed the doorway of the ruined, old library, a small, cold hand reached out from the darkness and grabbed my wrist. I didn't flinch. I let myself be pulled into the shadow of the heavy wooden doors. Macy stood there, wearing a simple gray nightgown. Her hair was dry now, but her face looked pale, the small red scar on her cheek looking dark and angry in the moonlight. "She took the medicine again today," Macy said, her voice quiet and clear, lacking any of the childish fear she used to show in front of her father. "Yes," I said, leaning against the dusty bookshelves. "She took the double dosage." "How much time is left?" 3 weeks, I said. "The king's anniversary banquet is in 3 weeks. That is when the false moon reaches its peak." Macy let out a soft, cold laugh. "She tried to kill me on Saturday, Vesper," she whispered, her hand tracing the wooden edge of the bookshelf. "She held me down in the water for nearly a minute before my father arrived. She told me she wished she had aborted Me when she had the chance. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying, unyielding determination. I want her to rot, Vesper. I want everyone to see what she is. Why do you hate her so much, Macy? I asked, looking down at the 7-year-old girl. She is your biological mother. A mother who pours boiling soup on her child to make her husband feel guilty is not a mother, Macy said, her voice dropping to a freezing register. And 5 years ago, when the healer girl was brought to the estate, I saw her. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. You saw Lyra? Yes, Macy nodded slowly. I was 2 years old, but I remember. My mother had her locked in the underground cellars beneath the greenhouse. She used to go down there with a silver cup and a small knife. She'd cut the girl's arms, fill the cup with her blood, and drink it in front of the mirror. Macy's fingers clenched into a fist. The girl was always crying, but she never fought back. She just looked at the ceiling and whispered a name. She kept saying, Vesper, don't come. Stay on the mountain. The tears I had spent 5 years holding back finally broke through. They spilled over my cheeks, hot and stinging against my skin. I fell to my knees on the dusty floor, my shoulders shaking with a grief so sharp it felt like a physical knife twisting in my ribs. Vesper, don't come. Stay on the mountain. She was dying, her blood being drained like wine for a vain, monstrous werewolf, and her only thought was to keep me safe. She took the lashes, she took the pain, and she took the death. Also I could remain free. Macy knelt down beside me. She didn't offer a childish hug. She simply placed her small, cold hand over my wrist, her eyes dark with a shared, silent pact. We will burn her, Vesper, Macy whispered. Together. The anniversary banquet of the king's ascension was the grandest event of the decade. The great hall of the royal pack was decorated with massive silk banners in the royal colors of crimson and gold. Hundreds of alpha wolves, pack elders, and noble guests from the neighboring territories had gathered, their glasses filled with expensive elixirs, the air thick with the scent of roasted meat and heavy pine incense. At the head of the long, raised table sat Alaric and the king, their expressions proud and regal. Beside Alaric sat Seraphina. She looked magnificent. She was wearing a gown made of pure white silk, embroidered with thousands of tiny silver pearls that caught the light of the massive chandeliers. Her belly was prominent, looking round and heavy under the silk. Her skin was impossibly pale, glowing with a ghostly, radiant light under the candles. Her entire body exuded a scent so sweet, so intoxicating, that several young alphas nearby were staring at her with glazed, unblinking eyes. Truly the future Luna, an elderly pack lord said, raising his cup to Alaric. Her beauty is a blessing to our pack. And with a male heir on the way, the Buxton line will remain secure for another century. Alaric smiled, his hand resting over Seraphina's hand on the table. The credit belongs to my wife. She has suffered much during this pregnancy, but she has remained strong. Seraphina turned to Alaric, her eyes crinkling in a perfect, adoring smile. It is my duty to the pack, my love. As long as you are by my side, I feel no pain. I stood behind her chair, holding the golden ewer of spiced wine. My eyes were fixed on the clock on the wall. 9 p.m. The peak of the false moon. Suddenly, Seraphina's hand twitched. The smile on her face froze, her fingers clenching around her golden cup so hard. The metal groaned. A sudden, sharp gasp escaped her lips, her body going completely rigid. Seraphina? Alaric asked, his brow furrowing as he looked at her. What is it? Is the baby kicking? I'm fine, she stammered, her voice suddenly sounding high, scratchy and dry. Just a sudden cramp. Vummy the tea, bring me the tea. I didn't move. I stood behind her chair, my hands holding the golden ewer, my eyes looking straight ahead. Vummy. Seraphina hissed, turning her head to glare at me. Are you deaf? Bring the. She stopped. The words died in her throat. Before the eyes of the entire royal court, a tiny, dark red line appeared on her cheek, running from the corner of her eye down to her jawline. It wasn't blood. It was a split. Her skin, which had been so pale and tight, was beginning to dry up like old parchment under the heat of the candles. The split widened, revealing the dark, putrid rot of the flesh beneath. Ah! A noble lady sitting nearby shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at her. Her face. Look at her face. Seraphina panicked, her hand flying to her cheek. The moment her fingers touched her skin, a massive chunk of her cheek sloughed off, falling onto the white silk of her gown with a wet, heavy plop. It was black, rotting, and smelled of putrid decay. The great hall erupted into a mass of chaotic screaming. Guests stood up from their seats, knocking over tables and glasses as they tried to escape the sudden, suffocating stench of rot that filled the room. A smell that was no longer hidden by the sweet scent of the blood lotus. Seraphina. Alaric roared, leaping from his seat, his chair falling backward, onto the stone floor. He grabbed her shoulder, but his fingers slipped through the thin, parchment-like skin, sinking directly into the soft, rotting muscle beneath. What is this? The king screamed, standing up with his sword half drawn. Guards! Is this an attack? Is she poisoned? It's not poison, your majesty. A quiet, clear voice rang out through the chaotic hall. I stepped forward from behind the chair. I took off my servant's cap, letting my dark hair fall around my shoulders, my face entirely calm, my eyes locked on the screaming, rotting woman on the floor. It is simply her own nature, I said. The true goddess's glow. Vesper. Seraphina screamed my name, her voice a guttural, choked rattle as she lay on the stone floor, her white silk gown soaked in a dark, foul-smelling fluid that was leaking from her belly. The pregnancy was dissolving. The false womb had ruptured, spilling liters of black, calcified tissue and rotting water onto the polished stone. There was no male heir. There was nothing but the putrid remains of her own greed. Guards, kill her. Alaric roared, pointing his sword at me. She poisoned the crown princess. The guards lunged forward, but before their swords could touch my neck, Macy stepped out from behind the royal pillar. Stop! Macy screamed, her voice carrying a sharp, alpha authority that made the guards hesitate. She walked into the center of the hall, her eyes fixed on her father. Father, she didn't poison her, Macy said, her voice steady and clear. The crown princess poisoned herself. For 5 years she has been consuming the blood lotus, believing it would keep her young. And 5 years ago she did something far worse. Macy pointed a shaking finger at the rotting woman on the floor. She kidnapped Lyra, the genius healer of the Moonscent clan. She locked her in the underground cells, drained her blood, and drank it to preserve her vanity. The scar on her wrist, the one she tried to hide, that was the mark left when the healer girl fought back. Alaric froze, his sword hovering in the air. He looked at Seraphina's wrist. The skin there had completely rotted away, but the deep, bone-deep scar was still visible, a clear, unyielding mark of a struggle. Is this true? Alaric asked, his voice shaking as he looked at the pack elders. The elders, who had been silent throughout the trial, looked at each other. One of them, an old wolf named Commander Buxton, stepped forward. The Moonscent clan was entirely destroyed 5 years ago, Your Highness, the elder said, his voice grave. The official report claimed they died of a sudden plague, but the records show that the crown princess's family, the Sterlings, were the ones who handled the cleanup. They confiscated all the clan's medicinal texts and assets. He looked at Seraphina, his eyes filled with a deep, professional disgust. It appears the plague was a cover-up to secure the healer's blood for the princess's use. Seraphina lay in the black puddle of her own rot, her fingers clawing weakly at the stone. Her beauty was entirely gone. She looked like a half-decayed corpse, her eyes bulging, her skin hanging off her bones in dry, yellow strips. Alaric. She whimpered, reaching a rotting, skeletal hand toward him. I did it for us, for your position, for our family. Alaric took a step back, his face contorted with a deep, nauseating disgust. You are not my wife, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You are a monster. He turned his back on her, his sword dropping to his side. Take her to the underground cells, Alaric ordered, his voice hollow. The ones where she kept her victims. Let her stay there until the rot is finished. The final chapter of Seraphina's life was written in the dark. She was locked in the same damp, cold cellar where Lyra had spent her last days. The room smelled of old iron, stagnant water, and the heavy, cloying scent of her own decay. She had no mirrors. She had no silk gowns, no velvet drapes, and no elixirs. Every day, her skin continued to slough off, her body slowly turning into dry, brittle straw under the parasitic influence of the blood lotus. She died, screaming, her voice eventually fading into a dry, raspy whistle before she drew her last putrid breath. The pack did not bury her. They dumped her remains in the same mass grave where she had thrown the Moonscent clan, her name erased from the royal registry, her face forgotten by the history of the pack. On a quiet, snowy morning, I stood by the gates of the royal pack. I was wearing a simple, warm wool cloak, my basket of medicinal herbs resting on my arm. My body no longer carried the sweet, artificial fragrance of the blood lotus. I smelled of fresh earth, winter pine, and the clean, cold wind of the mountains. Macy stood beside me, wearing a simple red coat. Her scar had healed into a small, pale line on her cheek, but her eyes were bright, clear, and filled with a quiet, peaceful strength. Are you really leaving, Vesper? Macy asked, looking up at me. My work here is done, Macy, I said, offering her a soft, genuine smile. The monster is gone. The sister is avenged. I reached into my cloak and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was the true Formula of the Moonscent clan. The one that healed scars, comforted the sick, and brought peace to the dying. Keep this, I said, placing the box in her hands. Use it to heal the people. Your mother hurt. Be a true Luna. Macy took the box, holding it tightly against her chest. I will. I turned around and walked out of the iron gates, my boots leaving a neat, steady trail of footprints in the fresh winter snow. The wind rustled through the pine trees, carrying a faint, sweet scent of lavender and dried chamomile, a scent that did not belong to a palace, but to the wild, free mountains where my sister was waiting for me. I looked up at the quiet, blue sky and took a deep, clean breath. I was finally home.